At Sunday dinner, my mom raised a toast and said, "We've decided to sell the family company, and before anyone asks, your sister's getting it all." Everyone clapped. I just smiled and asked, "Who handled the deal?" My dad said, "Some private investor named Williamson Group." I couldn't help but laugh. "Mom, I am Williamson Group." The table went dead silent. I, 33M, just revealed I'm the private investor who bought my family's company at Sunday dinner. The dining room had that perfect Sunday afternoon light filtering through the curtains, casting everything in a warm glow that made the whole scene feel almost sacred. Mom had outdone herself with the roast, and the table was crowded with all the usual faces. My sister sat across from me, radiating that familiar smugness she'd worn since childhood whenever she knew something good was coming her way. Dad was at the head of the table, already on his second glass of wine. I was pushing potatoes around my plate when Mom stood up, wine glass in hand. She cleared her throat, and the table fell quiet. She announced that she and Dad had made a decision about the family company, the business my grandfather had built from nothing, and that had supported 3 generations of our family. The company was being sold. But before anyone got worried, she wanted everyone to know that my sister would be receiving all the proceeds from the sale. The table erupted in applause. My sister's face lit up like Christmas morning. Relatives I barely recognized were reaching across the table to congratulate her. I just sat there, smiling. Not the fake smile I'd perfected over years of family dinners, but a genuine one. Because I knew something they didn't. I asked who had handled the deal, keeping my voice casual. Dad wiped his mouth with his napkin and said it was some private investor group. The Williamson Group. Very professional, he added. They'd made a generous offer, and the whole transaction had been remarkably smooth. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not a little chuckle, but a real, from-the-belly laugh that made everyone stop and stare at me. Mom asked what was so funny, her smile already fading. I set down my fork and looked directly at her. I told them I was the Williamson Group. I was the private investor who'd bought their company. The silence that followed was absolute. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. That was the only sound in the room. I should back up. This didn't start at Sunday dinner. This started 3 years ago when I first asked to join the family business. I just finished my MBA from a top-tier school, had 2 years of consulting experience under my belt, and actually had ideas about how to modernize the company. My grandfather's manufacturing business had been profitable for decades, but it was stuck in the past. I could see the potential for expansion, for incorporating new technology, for breaking into markets we'd never considered. Dad heard me out over lunch. He nodded in all the right places, asked some questions that made it seem like he was taking me seriously. Then he told me the company wasn't the right fit for me. My talents would be wasted there. Maybe I should continue building my own career path. My sister, who had a degree in communications and had spent the last 4 years working at a nonprofit making half my salary, was brought on board 2 months later as Director of Strategic Initiatives, a position they created specifically for her. She had no business background, no manufacturing experience, nothing that qualified her except her last name, and the fact that she'd always been the favorite. I tried not to let it bother me. I threw myself into my consulting work, started making real money, built up a network. But it ate at me. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, I had to hear about the company, about my sister's ideas, about how proud Mom and Dad were of the direction things were heading. The direction, as far as I could tell from the outside, was stagnation. Revenue was flat. They'd lost 2 major contracts to competitors who had modernized their operations. But my sister got promoted to VP. They gave her a corner office. Mom bragged to everyone who would listen about how her daughter was going to take over the family legacy. I was never even in the conversation. So I started planning. I reached out to some former colleagues, people I'd worked with in consulting who'd gone into private equity. I formed an LLC under a name that meant nothing to my family. Williamson was my mother's maiden name. Ironic, given how this would all play out. I started quietly buying shares from minority stakeholders who were frustrated with the company's direction. Small percentages here and there, nothing that would raise red flags. Then the pandemic hit. The company struggled like everyone else, but Dad and my sister made some spectacularly bad decisions. They overextended on a contract that fell through. They invested in new equipment for a product line that became obsolete within 6 months. The company started bleeding money. I watched it all happen from my comfortable distance, building my position, waiting. Through intermediaries and shell companies, I now owned 38% of the company. Not controlling interest, but enough to matter. Enough that when I approached my parents about buying them out entirely, they had to listen. The offer was generous. More than fair, actually. I made sure of that. I didn't want them to be able to claim I'd cheated them. The Williamson Group offered a premium price for their controlling stake, plus a structured buyout of all remaining minority shareholders. Clean, professional, exactly the kind of deal any rational business owner would jump at. They jumped at it, signed the papers without ever knowing who was really behind the offer. My lawyers had done their job perfectly. Every layer of corporate structure was legitimate, every document clean. The Williamson Group was real. It just happened to be wholly owned by me. Back at the dinner table, Dad had gone pale. Mom looked like she couldn't decide if she was going to cry or start throwing things. My sister was the first to find her voice. She asked what I meant, what kind of sick joke this was. I pulled out my phone and opened up the corporate documents. I walked them through it, calm and methodical. The Williamson Group, the LLC structure, the acquisition timeline, every share purchase, every intermediary, every shell company. All of it led back to me. Dad asked why I would do this. I reminded him of 3 years ago. I reminded him of the lunch, where he told me I wasn't right for the family business. I reminded him of every time since then that he'd chosen my sister over me. Every opportunity I'd been passed over for. Every time I'd been made to feel like I wasn't good enough to be part of the family legacy. Mom said I was being ridiculous. They'd always supported both of us equally. I asked her when she'd last asked about my career. When she'd last taken an interest in what I was doing, the deals I was closing, the success I was having. When had she ever bragged about me the way she bragged about my sister? The silence was answer enough. My sister's voice was shaking now. She asked what I was going to do with the company. She'd been promised the proceeds from the sale. She'd already made plans. I told her the sale was complete. The money had been transferred according to the contract. What my parents chose to do with that money was their business. But the company now belonged to me, and I had plans for it. Plans that didn't include her position. Dad stood up so fast his chair fell backward. He told me I couldn't do this. They'd fight it. They'd sue. They'd get lawyers. I invited him to try. Every transaction had been legitimate. Every document was in order. I had the best lawyers money could buy review every step. There was nothing to fight. The company was mine, fair and square. They'd sold it to me, they just hadn't bothered to check who was buying. Mom asked how I could betray my family like this. That made me laugh again. I asked her what she thought she'd been doing to me for the past 3 years. What she'd been doing my whole life, choosing my sister for everything that mattered. I told her this wasn't betrayal. This was business. The same business they'd told me I had no place in. My sister was crying now. She said she'd worked hard for that position, that she'd earned her place in the company. I could have been cruel. I could have told her exactly what I thought of her qualifications, her work ethic, her contributions to the company's recent decline. But I didn't. I just told her that her employment would be terminated effective immediately, per the terms of the acquisition. She'd receive a severance package as outlined in her contract. Nothing more, nothing less. The dinner table had become a war zone. Relatives were trying to figure out whose side to take. Some were quietly impressed with what I'd pulled off. Others were horrified. Mom's sister was actually crying. Dad's brother looked like he was trying not to laugh. I stood up, dropped my napkin on my plate, and told them I had work to do. The company needed immediate restructuring if it was going to survive. I had meetings scheduled, consultants waiting, a whole transformation plan ready to implement. I thanked Mom for dinner and walked out. Update 1. That was 6 months ago. I haven't been invited to Sunday dinners since. The company is doing better than it has in 5 years. I brought in the management team I'd been planning, implemented the modernization strategies I'd originally proposed, and we've already landed 2 major contracts that my father had failed to secure. Revenue is up 23%. We're profitable again. My sister found a new job at another nonprofit. I heard through the grapevine that she had to take a pay cut. I can't say I feel bad about that. Mom sends me texts occasionally. Short, cold ones asking about business matters that don't concern her anymore. She never asks how I am. I answer the business questions professionally and ignore the subtext. Dad tried to get a meeting with me 2 months after the dinner. He showed up at my office unannounced, told my assistant it was urgent family business. I had her tell him I was in meetings all day. I was actually sitting at my desk, but I didn't see the point in rehashing everything. He hasn't tried again. The really interesting development came last month. 3 of the minority shareholders I'd bought out early in the process reached out to me. They'd heard about the turnaround, seen the numbers, and wanted to invest again. I sold them back small positions at a premium. The company is now worth significantly more than what I paid for it. My parents got a fair price in the sale. More than fair, actually. What they did with that money is their choice. The fact that they'd already promised it all to my sister isn't my problem. They signed the deal. They chose not to investigate who was behind it. That's on them. Some people have told me I went too far. That family is supposed to mean something. That blood is thicker than water. But those people weren't sitting at that lunch 3 years ago when my father told me I wasn't good enough for the family business. They weren't at countless dinners where every achievement of mine was glossed over while my sister got applause for mediocrity. I gave them a chance to include me. They chose not to, so I included myself. Update 2. The lawyers came, just like Dad promised they would. They tried to claim fraud, misrepresentation, undue influence. My legal team tore them apart in depositions. Every transaction was clean. Every document was legitimate. The Williamson Group was a real entity, properly registered, fully compliant with all regulations. The fact that my parents hadn't bothered to investigate their buyer wasn't fraud. It was their own negligence. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice 3 months ago. Dad's lawyers advised him not to appeal. It would just cost more money and had zero chance of success. Mom tried a different approach. She called me crying one night, said she didn't understand how things had gotten so bad between us. She wanted to fix our relationship. She wanted her family back. I asked her what she was willing to do to fix it. She said she wanted to talk, to explain their side of things, to help me understand why they'd made the decisions they had. I told her I understood perfectly. They'd valued my sister more than me. They'd seen her as the heir to the family legacy, and me as an outsider, despite the fact that I was more qualified in every measurable way. They'd made their choice, and I'd made mine. She told me I was being unfair, that they'd always loved both of us equally. I asked her to name one significant thing they'd done to support my career. One time they'd chosen me over my sister for something that mattered. One instance where they'd valued my input or my capabilities. She couldn't. She cried harder and told me I was breaking her heart. I told her she'd broken mine years ago. She just hadn't noticed because she was too busy celebrating my sister. We haven't spoken since. The company continues to thrive. We just landed a contract that will take us into international markets for the first time in the company's history. The board, which is now made up of people I trust and who actually know what they're doing, has approved an expansion plan that will double our manufacturing capacity over the next 2 years. My grandfather would have been proud. That's what I tell myself anyway. He built this company from nothing because he saw an opportunity and had the guts to take it. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't let other people tell him what he was capable of. Neither did I. Update 3. Last week, something unexpected happened. My grandfather's brother, now in his 80s, reached out to me. He'd heard about everything that had gone down and wanted to meet. We had lunch at the same restaurant where Dad had told me I wasn't right for the family business. I thought that was fitting. He told me that my grandfather had worried about what would happen to the company after he was gone. He'd loved my father, but he'd known Dad wasn't the visionary type. He was a maintainer, not a builder. Grandpa had hoped the next generation would include someone with the same drive he'd had. My great-uncle told me that before he died, my grandfather had asked him to keep an eye on things, to make sure the company stayed in the family, but more importantly, to make sure it stayed alive, to make sure it kept growing and adapting. He said he'd watched me over the years, he'd seen me try to get involved, he'd noticed how my parents shut me out, and when the Williamson Group started making moves, he'd done some digging. He'd figured out it was me within the first month. I asked him why he hadn't said anything. He smiled and told me that my grandfather hadn't built the company by asking permission either. He'd done what needed to be done, and if people didn't like it, that was their problem. He said I was more my grandfather's grandson than my father was his son. Then he told me something that changed everything. There was a trust. Money my grandfather had set aside, separate from the company, that was supposed to go to whichever grandchild carried on his legacy. Not in name, but in spirit. The trustees had been watching, waiting to see which of us would prove worthy. The trust was worth more than my parents had gotten from selling the company. And it was mine. My great-uncle had already talked to the other trustees. The decision was unanimous. I'd done what my grandfather would have wanted. I'd fought for the company. I'd saved it. The money was mine to use as I saw fit, with the understanding that it should go toward building something lasting. I sat there in that restaurant, in the same booth where my father had rejected me, and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. My great-uncle asked me what I was going to do with it. I told him I was going to build an empire. Not just save the company, but expand it. Diversify. Acquire complementary businesses. Create something that would last another 3 generations at least. He raised his glass and told me that's exactly what my grandfather would have said. We toasted to the old man, to vision, to having the guts to take what's yours. I still don't go to Sunday dinners. I'm not invited, and even if I was, I wouldn't go. That chapter is closed, but I carry my grandfather's name on the company letterhead now. I added it back after the acquisition was complete. It had been removed years ago in a rebranding effort my sister had spearheaded. Now it's there again in the same font, in the same position, a reminder of where we came from, and a promise of where we're going. People ask me if I feel guilty, if I regret how things went down, if I wish I'd handled it differently. I don't. Every step I took was a direct response to how they treated me. They had years to make different choices. They had countless opportunities to see me, to value me, to include me. They chose not to, so I chose to include myself. The company is thriving, the legacy is secure, and I did it without them, despite them, because of my own vision and my own work. They taught me I'd never be good enough for the family business. I proved them right. I wasn't good enough for their version of it. I was too good for it. So I took it and made it into something worthy of my grandfather's name. Something worthy of me. That's not betrayal. That's justice.